This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Chet Chris, London, UK. The Triumphs of Eugene Valmont by Robert Barr. Chapter 5. The Absent-Minded Coterie, Part 2. I took a cab to the foot of Tottenham Court Road, and walked up that street till I came to J. Simpson's old curiosity shop. After gazing at the well-filled windows for some time, I stepped aside, having selected a little iron crucifix displayed behind the pane, the work of some ancient craftsman. I knew at once from Podger's description that I was waited upon by the veritable respectable clerk who brought the bag of money each night to Park Lane, and who I was certain was no other than Ralph Summertrees himself. There was nothing in his manner differing from that of any other quiet salesman. The price of the crucifix proved to be 7 and 6, and I threw down a sovereign to pay for it. "Do you mind the change being all in silver, sir?" he asked, and I answered without any eagerness, although the question aroused a suspicion that had begun to be allayed, "Not in the least." He gave me a half-crown, 3 two-shilling pieces, and 4 separate shillings, all the coins being well-worn silver of the realm, the undoubted inartistic product of the reputable British Mint. This seemed to dispose of the theory that he was palming off illegitimate money. He asked me if I were interested in any particular branch of antiquity, and I replied that my curiosity was merely general, and exceedingly amateurish, whereupon he invited me to look around. This I proceeded to do, while he resumed the addressing and stamping of some wrapped-up pamphlets which I surmised to be copies of his catalogue. He made no attempt either to watch me or to press his wares upon me. I selected at random a little inkstand, and asked its price. It was 2 shillings, he said, whereupon I produced my fraudulent 5-shilling piece. He took it, gave me the change without comment, and the last doubt about his connection with coiners flickered from my mind. At this moment a young man came in, who I saw at once was not a customer. He walked briskly to the farther end of the shop, and disappeared behind a partition which had one pane of glass in it that gave an outlook toward the front door. "Excuse me a moment," said the shopkeeper, and he followed the young man into the private office. As I examined the curious heterogeneous collection of things for sale, I heard the clink of coins being poured out on the lid of a desk or an uncovered table, and the murmur of voices floated out to me. I was now near the entrance of the shop, and by a sleight-of-hand trick keeping the corner of my eye on the glass pane of the private office, I removed the key of the front door without a sound, and took an impression of it in wax, returning the key to its place unobserved. At this moment another young man came in, and walked straight past me into the private office. I heard him say, "Oh, I beg pardon, Mr. Simpson. How are you, Rogers?" "Hello, Macpherson," saluted Rogers, who then came out, bidding good night to Mr. Simpson, and departed whistling down the street, but not before he had repeated his phrase to another young man entering, to whom he gave the name of Tyrrell. I noted these 3 names in my mind. 2 others came in together, but I was compelled to content myself with memorizing their features, for I did not learn their names. These men were evidently collectors, for I heard the rattle of money in every case. Yet here was a small shop doing apparently very little business, for I had been within it for more than half an hour, and yet remained the only customer. If credit were given, 1 collector would certainly have been sufficient, yet 5 had come in, and had poured their contributions into the pile Summertrees was to take home with him that night. I determined to secure one of the pamphlets which the man had been addressing. They were piled on a shelf behind the counter, but I had no difficulty in reaching across and taking the one on top, which I slipped into my pocket. When the 5th young man went down the street, Summertrees himself emerged, and this time he carried in his hand the well-filled locked leather satchel with the straps dangling. It was now approaching 5:30, and I saw he was eager to close up and get away. "Anything else you fancy, sir?" he asked me. "No, or rather yes and no. You have a very interesting collection here, but it's getting so dark I can hardly see." "I close at 5:30, sir." "Ah, in that case," I said, consulting my watch, "I shall be pleased to call some other time." "Thank you, sir," replied Summertrees quietly, and with that I took my leave. From the corner of an alley on the other side of the street I saw him put up the shutters with his own hands. Then he emerged with overcoat on and the money satchel slung across his shoulder. He locked the door, tested it with his knuckles, and walked down the street carrying under one arm the pamphlets he had been addressing. I followed him some distance, saw him drop the pamphlets into the box at the first post office he passed, and walk rapidly towards his house in Park Lane. When I returned to my flat and called in my assistant, he said, "After putting to one side the regular advertisements of pills, soap, and what not, here is the only one common to all the newspapers, morning and evening alike. The advertisements are not identical, sir, but they have 2 points of similarity, or perhaps I should say 3. They all profess to furnish a cure for absent-mindedness. They all ask that the applicant's chief hobby shall be stated, and they all bear the same address, Dr. Willoughby, in Tottenham Court Road." "Thank you," said I, as he placed the scissored advertisements before me. I read several of the announcements. They were all small, and perhaps that is why I had never noticed one of them in the newspapers, for certainly they were odd enough. Some asked for lists of absent-minded men, with the hobbies of each, and for these lists prizes of from 1 shilling to 6 were offered. In other clippings, Dr. Willoughby professed to be able to cure absent-mindedness. There were no fees and no treatment, but a pamphlet would be sent, which, if it did not benefit the receiver, could do no harm. The doctor was unable to meet patients personally, nor could he enter into correspondence with them. The address was the same as that of the old curiosity shop in Tottenham Court Road. At this juncture I pulled the pamphlet from my pocket and saw it was entitled Christian Science and Absent-Mindedness by Dr. Stamford Willoughby, and at the end of the article was the statement contained in the advertisements that Dr. Willoughby would neither see patients nor hold any correspondence with them. I drew a sheet of paper towards me, wrote to Dr. Willoughby alleging that I was a very absent-minded man and would be glad of his pamphlet, adding that my special hobby was the collecting of first editions. I then signed myself Allport Webster, Imperial Flats, London, W. I may here explain that it is often necessary for me to see people under some other name than the well-known appellation of Eugene Valmont. There are 2 doors to my flat, and on one of these is painted Eugene Valmont. On the other there is a receptacle in which can be slipped a sliding panel bearing any nom de guerre I choose. The same device is arranged on the ground floor, where the names of all the occupants of the building appear on the right-hand wall. I sealed, addressed, and stamped my letter, then told my man to put out the name of Allport Webster, and if I did not happen to be in when anyone called upon that mythical person, he was to make an appointment for me. It was nearly 6 o'clock next afternoon when the card of Angus Macpherson was brought in to Mr. Allport Webster. I recognised the young man at once as the second who had entered the little shop carrying his tribute to Mr. Simpson the day before. He held 3 volumes under his arm, and spoke in such a pleasant, insinuating sort of way that I knew at once he was an adept in his profession of canvasser. "Will you be seated, Mr. Macpherson? In what can I serve you?" He placed the 3 volumes backs upward on my table. "Are you interested at all in first editions, Mr. Webster?" "It is the one thing I am interested in," I replied, "but unfortunately they often run into a lot of money." "That is true," said Macpherson sympathetically, "and I have here 3 books, one of which is an exemplification of what you say. This one costs £100. The last copy that was sold by auction in London brought £123. This next one is £40, and the third £10. At these prices I am